So now we're going to be talking to John Kamatis. John is deaf, and because obviously we're doing this virtually, we're using an interpreter as well, who we're not going to be able to see in the background. So, John, are we there?
Hi there, yes, I'm here.
How are you, John? You well?
Oh, I'm fine, thank you very much. Would you like to tell you a bit about myself, first of all, introduce myself?
Yes, please, go ahead, John.
Okay, well, my name is John Kamatis. Okay, are you both well?
Yes, I'm very well, and the guys here in the studio, we're all keeping well, thank you very much. So, I suppose the best way to start this interview is, with your disability of being deaf, you know, is there any either funny or humorous situations, or maybe an awkward situation that you found yourself in that you can think of?
Well, I've actually got one funny story I can tell you. I remember when I was young, now this was at primary school, and I had to wear hearing aids at the time, and it was like a radio aid. And lots of teachers use them to teach deaf children. It's like a technological aid, if you will. Now, sometimes what will happen is the teacher would forget to turn the radio aid off. Now, they might go to the toilet. When they go to the toilet, you can hear what's happening, or they might have what should be a private conversation. And what would actually happen is that I would be able to hear what was going on fully because they hadn't switched their radio aid off.
Amazing, amazing.
Really embarrassing situation for the teacher, as you can imagine, but you know, it happened a long time ago. It's not something that we use anymore, actually, those radio aids. They're not something that tends to be used in classroom these days.
Oh, I can tell you, using microphones and things like that, like the one I've got on at the moment, I found myself in similar situations forgetting to turn a microphone off.
And sometimes, you know, people will forget to turn their microphone off, you know, when it's linked up to a hearing aid. I've got actually one hearing aid that I wear. When I was younger, I wore two. I've got rid of one of them now. I was born profoundly deaf. So, you know, I do rely on my hearing aids quite a lot, and I have learned to speak. And I've also actually learned sign language later on after I've grown up. But funnily enough, you know, I'll pick up, you know, things incorrectly with sign language, you know. I've also learned American Sign Language, you know. Sometimes I make funny mistakes when I'm doing that, you know. Sometimes things go a little bit wrong when you're communicating, don't they?
So obviously then, like you said, you've taken steps to learn not only BSL but American Sign Language as well. If you were going somewhere new, for example, would you look at where you're going online first to see if there's anything that might help with your disability, or see if a venue that you're planning to attend has an accessibility assistance for you in some way or another?
Okay, so I actually went to an event in London, something that I saw online called Heroes and Villains. I was really excited because there were going to be lots of famous people there. I wanted to make sure that it was accessible, so I thought I'd have a look. So I needed to contact them. And it was actually at a place called the Olympia. So what I did is I dropped them an email, and they got back to me, and they told me they would have an interpreter, and that also that the event would be captioned. I was completely blown away. I didn't know that was something they could do. So, you know, I'd asked for that information and found out that it was totally accessible, which was brilliant. You know, and also got the opportunity to meet some famous people there as well, like the person that's in a series called Arrow, also people from a series called Gotham as well. And it was just a fantastic experience. You've got to consider these things about accessibility for disabled people, because, you know, a lot of people, for example, people that use wheelchairs, people that are blind and deaf, you know, and they have all these accessibility arrangements for people like that. You know, I was really happy, you know, thinking about the fact that they put those things in place for disabled people to make it accessible.
I understand as well that you do a lot locally to promote deaf awareness. Can you tell me a little bit about that?
So yeah, absolutely. Currently, I'm working as a deaf and hard of hearing link worker to help stop deaf and hard of hearing people feeling lonely and isolated. Now, lots of people maybe have never met a deaf person and wonder how to communicate with them. So what I do is I try and give some information to raise awareness as to how to do that. And remember that some deaf people don't sign, that they may rely on spoken language. Also giving some tips really on how to communicate effectively and teach some basic sign language as well. So for example, I live, where I live in my local area, there's a sandwich shop, and they realise that I'm deaf because I go there often. They'll use gestures with me, they'll remove their mask if they're needed to do so. That's without even asking, so that's quite a positive thing really. They see my face all the time because I live locally, so really it's important, not to be afraid to ask a deaf person if you're not sure what to do. But as I say, I'm regularly seeing the same people there at the same time, so that's really good. They know how to help me at that particular place.
So, okay, then from that, I would say then, what would be your top tip for a business for how to help someone who has either a hearing impairment or someone who might be completely deaf?
Well, I think it's being prepared to ask a deaf person. Also being prepared to remove the mask if you need to communicate. Maybe using other things like writing things down, writing things down to communicate if it's not clear. Using facial expressions, not being frightened most of all. Now for me, I think it's really important more than ever to communicate, to try and understand one another, to try and empathise. And if you don't understand each other first of all, perhaps they might use their phone to type in a message, in written English, little things like that you can adjust along the way that will help.
So I imagine then that because of COVID, you've obviously had some barriers in the past with communication, which has, led you to be such an advocate for deaf awareness. With COVID, having masks that cover your face, is this quite a big thing for someone with either hearing or who's deaf?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the problem I have as well is phone calls. A lot of places at the moment are saying that you've got to phone them in order to inquire or access the service. Now, how am I supposed to do that as a deaf person? Recently, I tried to actually book some theatre tickets. And it's actually a captioned theatre performance that I wanted to go to, and they said that you can't do that. And I said, well, before I've sent an email to pay you to buy the tickets via email, and of course it's difficult for me to make the phone call to do that. And they've suggested that I would have to use a software called NGT software, but unfortunately sometimes you use that software and it just rings out and nobody answers the phone. So I can be quite unhappy with some level of customer services where they don't make that adjustment. And also, if I want to book a doctor's appointment, sometimes they'll send me a text, which is great. It might be that they're telling me it's time for my flu jab or it's time to make an appointment, but then they'll say, right, you want your flu jab, you've now got to ring in to get that, and that becomes very difficult. That's a barrier. So fortunately, there are some places where you can use apps to book appointments, and then you can do it that way, so it's a little bit way of getting around the problem. So I think a lot of people don't realise that deaf people can have difficulties using the telephone, and that lack of awareness is a problem sometimes.
Indeed. Well, John, thank you very much for sharing your experiences with us today, and keep up with the amazing work that you do for deaf awareness.
Yeah, thank you very much. Thank you, will do.
So there we have it. John is deaf and uses an interpreter as well as, the spoken English or the written English to be able to communicate with people. And especially in this incredibly tough time with COVID, people wearing face masks, that makes very difficult communication for someone who has either a hearing impairment or is fully deaf. Now, if you'd like to find out any more information that might help your business with accessibility for a whole range of disabilities, please go to accessfilecoast.co.uk and see what there is there. Goodbye.